All right, welcome everyone to another Marquez community meeting. This one's going to be pretty exciting. I know I always say that, but this time we have some pretty cool stuff to demo. In particular, the Lineage API that allows you to query job and dataset metadata that made it into Marquez 013 release. So if we quickly look at the release notes, so the 013 was published 2 days ago, and this had quite a few fixes, changes, and also additions. What I'm going to do is I won't go through all of them. I think they're all really important, but there are some things that we wanted to highlight in this meeting. So if we kind of highlight some of the additions, what we have now is a new Seed CLI. So before, Marquez had a script in the repo that seeded the API, but now we kind of moved that into a command. So if I was going to, I don't know if I had the jar built, so I'm going to build it either way, just to show you. Let that run really quick. But what this ends up doing is it populates Marquez with a 24-hour window of metadata. So you'll have 24 hours of worth of job runs. You'll have data sets that are associated with those jobs. You'll have schemas, and that's all in code. Like I said before, originally it was in a script file, so it was a lot harder to actually modify it. So now if you, I'll actually go to the code really quick here. So there's a new package. So if I type in, I think I just typed in seed. Oh, I didn't. That seed script is still relevant. But in under the CLI package, this is where if others were interested in adding additional commands to Marquez, you could totally do that. This is just one example. We have up here, there's some Java docs. So here, if you look, you'll be able to kind of specify the jar, give the seed command, and if you wanted to override the port, you could totally do that as well. And you just need to give the Marquez config file, so that way it knows how to, it's just one of the requirements that need to be passed in. But it's kind of nice because if there's anything in the configuration that you do need as you're defining your command, or let's say if you wanted to extend the C command to do more fancier things, you could totally do that, and you have access to the config file. So all the metadata is defined within this class. This was something. That's not passing because I don't. Yeah, we won't have. Let's not worry about that now. But I think I'm not setting. The one thing for Spark is you have to set the JDK 8 home, and I don't think I'm setting it there, which is not passing the test. But this suffices for now. I just kind of wanted to point it out that it's something that can be used, and if there's others that want to enhance the quick start guide in particular, here. So that seed command is going to be used on Docker when you run the Docker up script. If you pass in the seed flag, it would actually use the CLI, the seed CLI, to then populate the lineage graph. Yeah, so that's something I wanted to point out. And feel free to modify it if you want to add nodes and feel like it would improve the example. We did some things around if you wanted to manually migrate your database or the schema from Marquez. But I think the next point is one of the more interesting things, and this is actually, Danny, give you a shout out because you've made so many changes. I think there's about maybe 15 plus actual DB schema migrations that went into this work. So it's non-trivial, and it's a really powerful API. But before, I think we dived into the more detailed part of what you did, Danny, like around the queries and so forth. Maybe I could just demo it really quick, and that way we can kind of have something to say. Okay, how did you get it to return the lineage graph? And you could go into some of the technical details there.
That's good.
Okay, so just to show you guys, like I'm not doing anything too special. If you pull the latest, so you pull main. So if you pull the latest, okay, oh, nice. There's some changes that made its way in. But if you do Docker up. I'll just build from source, and I'll do the, we have published the Docker images for 0.13. So if you wanted to use the latest images and the tagged images as well, you could, those are out. But what I'm gonna do now is run the seed command, and that's what I mentioned just before this. So it's gonna use the seed command that now is part of Marquez. So I'm gonna let this run. I just get these errors up there, which I should fix. Okay. Let me switch my screen here. And while that's running, so it's going to seed, it's going to bring up the API, database, UI, and but while that's running, what I wanted to do, okay. So you can, I'm going to open up the spec. So if you go to our docs and you go to the API spec for 0.13, you'll see, I'll zoom in here, you'll see that you have your standard APIs for namespaces, source, and datasets and jobs, but now you'll see there's this new Lineage tab. And if we walk through this, there'll be query parameters. There's two that are one that's required, and that's just the node ID. We're working on, so the Lineage API is in beta. I mean, there's, for the most part, at Datakin, so with Datakin, we build on top of Marquez APIs and build more data lineage analysis APIs on top of the metadata that's already collected by Marquez. So we've been testing this out internally, and this was just an effort to push that upstream to Marquez after we ran it in our production systems and felt pretty comfortable with the implementation, but also the spec itself. So what's actually returned in the call. So the one key thing here is that nodes, they're broken up into 3 parts, and this is not documented, but boy, we should document this. So the first part will have the type. So if this is a job or if this is a data set. The second component is going to be the namespace that the job or data set is associated with. And the last component is just the name of the data set or the name of the job. So when we go through our examples, I'll do a lineage query for jobs, but I'll also do it for data sets as well. And then you have a max depth. So here it's 50. I think that's good enough. We could tweak that if we thought that was not enough, or it was too much. So what that depth means is as you start at a node, how far left and right it should go. So should it go 3 to the left in terms of the graph, the lineage graph? So to make that a little bit more concrete in our example here. So if I start at this node, how many depths? So depths is just, if you think about this as a vertical bar. So this would be depth 1, depth 2, depth 3. So that's what it means by depth. So how big of a graph do you want returned? And the endpoint itself is lineage. So here you have API v1, and I think actually it's v1 beta. So we might have to adjust that. So sorry about the docs not being 100%, but you'll see that it's under beta. We did the same thing with the graph API because we're still iterating on that. So it'd be v1-beta and then provide the endpoint. So if we look at the response, this is the more interesting part. And what you end up getting back is an array of nodes. So each node is going to have an ID. It's going to have a type. So depending on the type, the data of the node changes. So if you're a job, you're going to have job metadata. And if we're querying, if the node is a data set, it's going to return data set metadata. And also, so before we get into the data part, we're going to look into the in and out edges. So since the graph is a flat structure, it's going to have arrays of in and out edges. Yes. So in this case, what's the origin? So if you think of a node, it's going to have an origin and a destination. So where's it coming from and where's it going to? And then it's also going to have a set of out edges. So, the current node, what are all the out edges? So you could think of, for a job, it's the out edges are going to be data sets and the in edges are going to be data sets. And for a data set node, you're going to have job edges. So which job produced this data set, and also which jobs downstream are using this data to do some processing. So let me close these back up. And then the data component should look pretty familiar. That's actually what we return for our dataset and jobs API. So when you query for a data set, we wanted to make sure that that mirrors. So if I go up, oops, if I go up to a data set, you'll see that this format that's returned is the exact format that you'll see when you do the lineage graph, when we produce the lineage graph itself. And a lot of that has to do with the rendering of the UI. So as we begin to shift from a web UI that queries the API, the jobs and namespace and dataset APIs directly to a graph, to the lineage graph, you don't have to do those extra crawls. We kind of believe that the lineage graph should have all the metadata for those nodes, and it just makes things a bit easier to, if you're building custom tooling on top of the Lineage API, or if you're building or trying to integrate the API within your UI, you should have all the metadata for those nodes, whether they're data sets or jobs. Okay. So I think so no, I don't know if I need to go through this. Just know that it's the dataset object that's returned from the dataset API, and then same thing for jobs. Those are also going to be the same. So Danny, did you want to make any comments before we moved on to the example?
No.
Okay, cool. Oh, well, I was gonna mention that the node IDs is something that we are working on right now. It's a string, but it'd be interesting to see what others think about what we can do to maybe break this up. So we thought about a node ID could actually have individual components. So you'd have a type, the namespace, and then the name, rather than having it a string and kind of parsing it and creating the node ID from 3 parts to a string, or going the other way around from a string to 3 parts. So that's something we've been discussing, which is why I kind of have it in beta, because we're not sure if where the node IDs are going to land and if there's more an efficient way to do it. But that was something I just wanted to bring up, that if you had some opinions, hit us in the Slack channel, or reach out to us on Twitter. Okay, so look at that. This is just the README. Okay, so all of our data has been seeded. Great. API is up. If I just do a quick, just make sure. Cool. We have all the components that we need: web, API, DB. So now if and what you'll see is that the lineage graph looks a little different, in a good way. I think there's just been with the Seed CLI that we introduced, it actually populates the metadata in a more predictable way. That script, I think we were just using it quickly and just kind of putting stuff together, and we were missing edges in the graph. So you'll have a graph that looks a little bit more full, and I think more representative of what the quick start should be. But our focus isn't really on exploring the UI. It's going to be on the API. But we're going to use the lineage graph as a way to showcase what the Lineage API can do. So if I take, let's go at the edge here, and here we have a job that's under the food delivery namespace, and it's got ETL orders with 1 output. So if I was going to go and use my REST client, and I'll zoom in here in just a bit. So I already ran some queries, but the one, I don't think you guys can see this that well. I'm sorry about that. So here, if we zoom, if I could zoom in, you'll see that there's API v1 beta and the lineage graph. And what we'll do is provide a node ID. So in this case, we're going to do the job node ID. And the only thing I'm going to replace is the, so after the 3rd colon, I'm going to paste in the example orders. So first, I'm going to use the default. So if you use the default, it returns back essentially the entire graph because you told the depth is 50, which is what the default is. So if I do a quick search here, there's probably a more efficient way to do this. Okay, but we eventually hit the node that we cared about. Okay, and so here we have the, if we remember the OpenAPI spec kind of said that the payload will be an ID, a type, the data. So the data now is really we get into the job metadata itself. So we can see that all that metadata is returned as well as the output. So here the outputs is a public orders, which is what we expect. This is an ETL job to just hourly push in data into a orders table. You'll get back the location, the latest run. So in this case, it's complete. So you could already see that, you don't have to individually query for the jobs themselves if you just want to explore. And I think this is a key thing. If you want to explore how dependencies are actually managed on the Marquez backend, you can now surface that up through the API and really begin to build powerful tooling on top of it. And this is a key thing here. So we know that there are no in edges, and there's an out edge, so origin and destination. So the origin, obviously, for the out edge is going to be the ETL orders job, and for the destination, that's going to be orders. So if we look at the node IDs again, you'll see that the origin is the job type and dataset is the dataset type. So and that's what is represented here. And I haven't tried this, but I'm excited to. I'm going to do a depth of 2. Let's see what happens. It should be, okay, so now you get back 37 days, depth. Okay, so this one I haven't tried directly. We get back, I think, a little bit more than I had expected. And I always love finding bugs while demoing in a community meeting. So this is something that we could file and see what's going on, but that's a minor thing. But when you adjust the depth, you should be able to get back a filtered set. So you shouldn't be able to get back the full lineage graph. And let's see what else. I mean, that was the general demo. I just kind of wanted to show you that what the payload looked like and what you'd expect. Maybe I could show a data set as well. So maybe I could do this one here. So, sorry. So I'll do delivery 7 days. Let's do that. So this, for our example, is supposed to show all the deliveries in the past week. Because, okay, that's great. That's a great way to demo it. So let's do a data set. Okay. So then you'll get back there. I mean, really, the idea was just to show you that you also can query for data set nodes. And if we go through the payload, we'll hit the food delivery. I mean, the delivery 7 days node. Maybe just do it for. Okay, here you go. And the one thing I wanted to show you, I think, for this was you'll know that it's a DB table because it's coming from Postgres. And also you get back the schema, so you'll get all the fields for the data sets. In this case, these are all the columns for the table. Okay. So that's what I wanted to show there. I think I'll stop sharing. The next steps are the Marquez UI that will have to begin to use the new Lineage API. And looks like, Peter, you're on the call. So before we get to maybe next steps on the Lineage API and what the web UI will be doing in terms of transitioning to the new API, Danny, I think it'd be cool if you wanted to walk through some of the queries that you introduced, because like we said, there's a lot of schema changes, but it's really to optimize for these type of queries that we have to do for the lineage graph.
Sure, yeah. I can go into a little bit of a technical deep dive here. So I'm going to share my screen out. So this is the Marquez data model. I'm just going to quickly touch on like the lineage query and how we sort of like situated it so we can like build a fast lineage query in Postgres. So generally your entry set will your entry point will either be a job or a data set. So you get a job by a name. And what we do is we find the current job version. And one job can have many job versions. A job version is just a distinct, run of a job based on its like inputs, its parameters, and its outputs. So what we do is we grab the job version, the current job version for that job, and then we follow this path here through data sets. So what we do is we take a look at that job version's inputs and outputs and see which data sets they're associated with. And then we recurse back to the job, the job ID itself, or job version, of like what job they reference. So that's important because the lineage query here, we're basically trying to find related jobs. And so what we do is, like, for example, this query, the important piece to look at is here. We're finding data sets that, we're finding jobs that share an input data set here because these are both inputs. We're trying to find jobs that share output data sets, which is this subquery here. We're trying to find jobs that that had an input that something else output, and vice versa. So this will construct the entire lineage query to get all of the jobs that are related to a particular job. And we do a depth first search here in order to find the most recent, to just like to build our graph. So the depth thing that we were looking at a little earlier, that is the depth by job. So that's how many jobs away it is. So a depth of 2 will likely return a lot of things for you because there's a lot of things that are 2 jobs away. And that is like the biggest contribution here. The other parts is we did a lot of things to optimize a lot of our queries to make it work a little bit better. So you can now, you don't have to build as many joins through a lot of these data sets or through a lot of these relationships. So like job names are accessible in job versions. Similarly with a data set version, the data set name and like the unique identifiers for it are accessible in that, in those tables, just to make querying a little bit easier on our database, gets a little bit better performance out of it. And most importantly, like a lot of times, like you'll want to scan through your runs to try to find, like a particular attribute. And so now you can just like the Postgres optimizer will scan the table rather than attempt to make a lot of joins and do a lot of like hash joins. So it's a lot more efficient to just do table scans for more analytic type queries. But yeah, those are some of the major contributions that I've made here. And yeah.
And I think the exciting thing about this is that we're not adding an extra piece of infrastructure. Really, we're kind of reusing Postgres. So Marquez still becomes simple where you just want to use the API and the Postgres background. Those are just 2 components. And if you wanted to use the UI, that's something that now it's just 3. So it was always making sure that was simple to deploy. And at the same time, like we, at Datakin, we've been kind of testing the queries, and they're pretty snappy. So I think that's the key thing. You could traverse how many nodes, like we're still kind of going through thousands, and we're getting pretty quick response time. So we have done some battle testing, and I think it would be great to see more people in the community kind of take this and see where it can break and ways we could optimize that query. But overall, really amazing work and a lot of denormalization. So when Marquez originally started at WeWork, it was very precise, and the queries themselves were fairly simple. But I think the work that Danny has been doing has made our lives a lot easier, both in contributing, but also I think exploring the metadata to allow us to push features a bit quicker. So pretty big contribution. Yeah. So before we go to Peter, because I think it'd be exciting to hear what you think about the API and maybe next steps for leveraging the Lineage API. Was there any questions on what we went over so far? Or can we answer any questions? Okay. All right, Peter. So if you wanted to Maybe talk about maybe when do you think leveraging this API is possible? Maybe give a really short-term roadmap on that.
Yeah, sure. So now that we have the Lineage API, I expect kind of the Marquez UI to evolve a bit and become a little bit more like other data science tools like Admonson and Data Hub in terms of their initial approach, where it's really a search-based experience, and we can search our backend, and then we can render lineage for anything in a search result set. So the way we do things now is, as Danny was alluding to, we actually query a large number of jobs and a large number of data sets, but it doesn't quite work in the sense of scalability, because we can only get so many, load so many jobs and data sets on our client at any given time. So if we have a lot of volume inside the Marquez database, we really need this solution to be based on the backend. So Danny was saying that we are doing a depth first search in our SQL queries to do this. Currently in the Marquez UI, we have a depth first search, searching those preloaded jobs and data sets and reconstructing that lineage graph that we saw earlier. So it will be really nice to kind of evolve things and allow the application to be just in time and feel a bit more like a really cohesive web application and responsive at the same time. So for us, this change is, I would say, of medium size. And my expectation is that it's probably weeks away from being integrated into the Marquez ecosystem. So that's kind of directionally where we're heading with it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the update. And I kind of agree with you. Like the current UI itself feels sometimes a bit clunky. It's not like, you know, I think the work that you've done to, I think this just overall CSS has been great. But you're right, you know, sometimes you have to refresh the page to review the lineage graph. And that's really what you were talking about, where it's got the UI has to build the graph itself. So now it could be a bit more responsive. And
yeah. Yeah, in a lot of ways, we're actually making our front end a little bit simpler, because we're not doing graph traversals there. We're just kind of rendering objects that the backend sends to us, which is actually simpler to work with than what we're doing right now. So there's multiple benefits to doing all of this.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm excited to see that work get kicked off. So thanks for the update, Peter. And I'll share my screen one more time. So I just want to make sure that I didn't miss. Let's see. Just going back to the release notes, I was kind of using this as a way to drive the meeting. And for those using Sentry, I just kind of want to say that Marquez has now a section in the config file to send. So if your org is a heavy Sentry users and you want to deploy Marquez, there's ways you can configure it now in the Marquez YAML. We have a new example that if you go ahead and take a look at if you'd like to get started with Airflow, and then the various other fixes and changes. So yeah, that's about it. I mean, Mike, who's on the call, has been continuously looking into the Spark integration. So get ready for that. I think, Mike, I'm not sure if you can make any comments on the work that you're doing with BigQuery, but that's been a big focus of yours, and updating our Spark integration to support BigQuery. But that was about it for me. And I know Mike, he's on a call, or he's on his cell phone, so it might be hard for him to mention anything. But I just want to say he's been doing some pretty amazing work on our Spark integration. So also excited to see that make a lot of progress. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no. I'm home now. But yeah, like I think there's a lot of improvements that are coming for the Spark integration. So a couple of things that I think we've maybe have already mentioned are the BigQuery BigQuery detection, and as well as like JDBC connections. So if you're collecting data from a Postgres instance or BigQuery, and you're writing that data into S3 or to GCS, that lineage is being tracked, as well as the statistics. So like the number of records and the number of bytes that are provided by those upstream data sources. So yeah, those are the big ones.
Nice, yeah. And I think it's important to mention that all this metadata that's going to be captured in our integrations is going to be using open lineage. So Marquez is completely transitioning over, and Mike, you've been working on the BigQuery integration, but the Spark integration will begin to capture, like you said, row counts or bytes. So that's really our initiative to switch to supporting some data quality metrics. So excited for that to also take effect. And so with that, bug fixes and stuff are important, but that was all I had in terms of the agenda. I think we covered the Seed command, which is helping drive the quick start. We went over the Lineage API with the demo, and we had Danny walk us through, I think, the technical side of what was going on. We talked a little bit about the web UI roadmap and also some cool things that are happening in Spark. But other than that, we could leave this open for questions. I think who's ever on the call and would just have general questions around metadata or the API that we've discussed, now's a really good time, and we're open for questions. Cool. We did an amazing job. We answered everyone's questions, but I think that's great. There was a lot that we covered. So if we're going to post this video shortly after. So if you want to look through it again, and if questions come up, you could reach out to us on Slack or, like I mentioned before, on Twitter. So with that, thanks again for everyone joining and kind of providing our updates on Marquez. And 013 is a pretty big one because of all the progress we've made. And just want to say thanks for everyone putting in this amazing effort to make it happen. Okay, so with that, all right, bye everyone.